Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 196 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 84 went 2-1 to profit 3.45 units overall. We won our bets on Brad Pickett and Davey Grant, but lost our play on Mike Wilkinson. We also lost 1 unit after going 1-2 on our free bets. Back to the present, UFC 196 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. All right, Nick, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass is a featherweight contest between Julian Erosa, who is 15-3, and Teruto Ishihara, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Rosa minus 270, the comeback on Ishihara, plus 190 right now over our sponsored sportsbook, 5dimes.eu. It is Rosa minus 200. Ishihara is plus 170. So line margins tighten up a little bit, and there's some dog action coming in on this fight early on. This time I do agree with the dog action coming in a little bit as far as value goes, because Ishihara, what it comes down to in this matchup is your striker versus grappler, basically. I know both of these guys are a little bit more well-rounded than that, but Erosa is going to be your grappler in this matchup, and Ishihara is going to be your striker in this matchup. And Ishihara has enough striking power and knockout power that he could present some problems for Erosa. So everybody hopping in early on this fight is probably banking on Ishihara by knockout. Now, if it goes to cards, I'm sure it'll be somewhat competitive and it'll be a close decision, but you still got to lean towards Erosa here because, again, I think he is a little bit more well-rounded. Erosa is going to have some length on him as well, so he's going to be the taller fighter, has a little bit of reach. He does have a little bit of striking, but he doesn't want to stand and bang with Ishihara because Ishihara, again, is a little bit more dangerous on the feet. He's a little bit more explosive. Both these guys are southpaws, so that makes it a little bit interesting as well. Both these guys are actually Ultimate Fighter veterans as well, so a lot going on here as far as matchup goes, and I'm glad the UFC kind of put these guys together because I think the winner of this fight is definitely going to take a decent step forward and earn some respect. What it comes down to for me is I think Erosa probably finds his way to Ishihara's back or gets this fight to the ground, and on the ground is where he's going to definitely have a bigger advantage. I think he knows, especially being knocked out by Lobov on the show on The Ultimate Fighter, that his chin has been tested and it didn't pass against some serious power. Ishihara probably is the more dangerous striker even than Lobov. So I think Erosa is going to take this fight to the floor. And once he does, I think Ishihara, if any weakness in his game, he's improved a little bit on the ground, but I still think that that's it. And Erosa is basically going to look for the submission and probably get it. So Erosa is going to win this fight, I think, a competitive decision or probably by submission on the ground. So I'm going to lean his way.
Yeah, this is definitely more of a striker versus grappler matchup, but what's going against Ishihara is he's giving up a lot of size here. I really think this guy could potentially make the bantamweight division, or either that or Erosa is just a monster in the featherweight division. But Erosa's getting about 6 inches in reach. He's about 6 inches taller as well. And Ishihara, even though he's the better striker, he's going to have to wade through Erosa's jab. Now, Ishihara definitely does have that ability to put opponents away. He's powerful. He's very aggressive. Both fighters are upright, and Erosa can be hurt and knocked out. I mean, you saw it on The Ultimate Fighter when Lobov put him away. He got rocked by Rosek in his UFC debut, and Ishihara definitely does have that ability to hurt his opponents. I mean, he had Mizuta Hirota dropped or rocked 3 separate times in all 3 rounds of his UFC debut, even though the fight went to a draw. Now, what's going against Ishihara is, on top of the size, his conditioning is just not UFC caliber. He does slow down quite a bit in fights. His defense is not so great. So if Ishihara does not put away Erosa quickly, then Erosa, I think, just takes over by pushing Ishihara into the fence, grinding this out a bit, Rosa does have a very good submission ability. You saw that in his UFC debut where he was repeatedly sweeping or fending off takedowns with guillotine chokes and just doing a lot of really nifty stuff on the ground. And if he can get his hands on Ishihara and start to slow him down, then I think Rosa probably picks up a submission win at some point in the late second or third round as Ishihara starts to fade. But again, Ishihara will be very dangerous early. That left hook is very powerful, and he does throw some nasty kicks as well. And Rosa could get, just laid into early. But again, I think Rosa picks this one up as it goes along and takes over late. So my pick is going to be Julian Rosa. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Jason Sago, who is 10-2, taking on Justin Salas, who is 12-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Sago minus 210. The comeback on Salas plus 160. Right now, looking over at the line at 5 dimes, it is Sago minus 210. The comeback on Salas is plus 175. So line has stayed steady. Two-way action coming into this fight. Nothing significant overall. And I think it is definitely an interesting spot. I mean, both these guys have been out for quite some time, since 2014 to be exact. Salas's loss to Proctor was his last fight, and Sago's split decision loss to Felder was his last fight as well. So Sago had some injuries to recover from, and he's bouncing back now. He's had the time to recover, and he's looking to kind of get back on track here against Salas. Now, Salas was the guy that had a little bit more hype coming in. I mean, he was a pretty well-rounded fighter, had a little bit of skill on the feet, had some wrestling to go along with it, but he's shown some defensive weaknesses thus far in the UFC. Obviously getting knocked out to Proctor and then being submitted by Tavares as well. So even though offensively he's not bad, defensively he definitely has some flaws. I think Sago has less flaws, honestly. I mean, his win over Shockley was actually pretty impressive. I know a lot of people aren't going to give Shockley a lot of respect, but in his debut win, had a performance, I mean, just doing what he does best. Sago is a ground fighter. He got the fight to the floor and he was able to do his thing, and he was able to finish Shockley early in that fight. So that was impressive. And then he bounced back with his second fight and actually had a very competitive fight with Felder that he arguably could have won. It was that close, and even rocked Felder on the feet, which is a little impressive considering Sago is more of a ground guy. So what this comes down to is, I think, who's the more reliable, who's the more steady fighter. I think it's Sago here, and I think his ground game is going to come into play, and he's going to be able to get Salas to the ground, and Salas is going to make a mistake. Sago's probably going to be able to get superior position and probably finish him off either by sub or just dominant position and start unloading. So I do trust Sago a little bit more. I think he comes back into this fight, gets a much needed win here, and he gets himself back on track, because I do think there's some potential for Sago at 155 for sure. So I'm expecting some good things in the future for him. I'm just not sure where Salas is at this point. A win here would definitely say a lot, and it'll get him back on track as well. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think Sago's ground game is going to be too much, and I'm going to pick him to win.
Yeah, the real thing here that I'm only worried about with Sago is how he bounces back from his injury. I mean, he's coming off of a torn Achilles tendon. That is a major, major injury. And if he has the confidence to use that foot the same way to explode off of it, then he should be in good shape. But if not, then if he's rusty and slow, then Salas could land some big strikes, maybe take this fight over. But for the most part, this is definitely Jason Sago's fight to lose. I like Sago. He's a great grappler, very aggressive, very fun fighter to watch, good scrambler. And Salas is not that great in terms of chin strength. He's been knocked out. He's a bit undersized in the lightweight division. And I think if these guys are just trading and Sago can get some takedowns, then I think Salas is going to be in some big trouble. I mean, Salas has been out just like Sago. He didn't fight in 2015, but as far as I know, I don't think Salas was suffering from any major injury unless he was hiding one. So he's just been out ever since he got TKO'd in his last fight. So I think Sago bounces back. He had a very competitive fight against Paul Felder, and he won his UFC debut. I think this guy's still got plenty left in the tank, and I think that Sago is able to secure some takedowns and then either grind this out or potentially get a TKO or submission finish on the ground. So I think Salas just gets overwhelmed a little bit here. So my pick is going to be Jason Sago. Now moving on to the main event of the Fight Pass prelims, we have two super UFC veterans, Diego Sanchez, who is 27-8, taking on Jim Miller, who is 25-6 with one no contest in a lightweight battle. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Miller minus 210, the comeback on Sanchez plus 160. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is Miller minus 140. Sanchez is plus 120. So what I thought would happen, and everybody kind of backing Miller over Sanchez in this fight, did not. Everybody kind of came in early on Sanchez. And I respect that. And I agree with it in a way, because I think it is a dog or pass situation here. And I'm surprised that people are giving Sanchez a shot and giving him some respect. So everybody that came in early on, I think they were pretty smart in going with the dog here in this matchup, because I realize, I mean, Sanchez, the thing with me is he hasn't realistically won a fight. And I think it's like, I don't know, 7 fights. I'm including 2 wins that he's got by close decisions that he shouldn't have got those decisions either. So it's been a long time since Sanchez really stepped up to the plate and performed in a winning manner. Now, of course, he's had some wars. He's had some respectable performances as far as hanging in there. Even the Melendez fight, for example. I mean, he had so much heart. So he's definitely the type of guy that's going to come in to win the fight, and he's got the cardio, he's got the conditioning, and he wants to win. So you got to love that in Sanchez. I mean, his attitude and that warrior spirit in him, I do respect that. Miller, on the other hand, has looked to be on the decline. I mean, he's had some okay performances recently, but at the same time, you could tell that he's definitely not the same fighter he was when he was making his run towards a UFC title shot. Unfortunately for Miller, things didn't work out, and right now it looks like he's definitely not in the peak of his career. So, I mean, just getting submitted offensively, Miller has a great submission game, and just seeing him get submitted a couple of times recently, it's just kind of sad in a way, because to me, it just seems like, I mean, his conditioning isn't there really up to par as it kind of once was, and he's a little bit more hittable. He just doesn't have what you expect out of Jim Miller. I mean, but here in this matchup, it is definitely a winnable fight for him, and I think he should be the slight favorite here in this spot, because I do think he's more technical on the feet. He's got the better striking. I think he's a little bit more dangerous offensively with the submissions. Now, defensively, there's definitely some concerns, like I said, with if Diego's able to get his back. Wouldn't be surprised, especially late, if Sanchez is able to sub him or pulls off a very close decision win against Miller, as he's going to push probably a higher pace. So this is definitely a tricky fight. It's basically, I think it's a toss-up with the slight lean towards Miller. So I'm going to go with Jim Miller a little bit. It's not a very confident pick, because I do think the pace Sanchez is going to push, and again, that warrior spirit's going to come through here, and he's going to make it interesting, especially on the scorecards if it does go that route. So still, I got to lean a little bit more towards Miller, because I do think he's going to be the better fighter on the feet. I think the wrestling should neutralize each other out a little bit. Miller probably is the better wrestler overall, but again, conditioning, you got to favor Sanchez, so that could change things as it goes. But still, I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit, even though I'm not confident. I'm going to pick Miller to win this fight. Both these guys are, like I said, on the decline, and their better days are gone, but I still think it's a big win for whoever gets this one, and I'm going to pick Miller to do that.
Yeah, I really think that this fight is all going to come down to who has more gas in the tank, because neither fighter has looked good recently. Jim Miller at least started strong against Michael Chiesa before fading and then getting submitted. And Diego Sanchez, you just never know what you're getting with him. It looked like he injured his leg in his last fight. And, he still was competitive against Ricardo Lamas, but clearly lost every round. So what's going to happen here is, what I expect is Diego Sanchez is going to push a really high pace on the feet. Jim Miller is going to be the more technical striker and probably land the better shots on the feet. And then if it goes to the ground, Miller should have an advantage in terms of his submissions, maybe sweeps, and Sanchez might have a stronger top game with wrestling. So very interesting dynamic with this fight. And the other thing you have to factor in is Jim Miller has really started to fade a lot in fights. Even like both guys are on a decline, but Jim Miller declines during fights. And if Miller starts to slow down, I can see Diego Sanchez taking over. And not just that, but he still does have a judge-friendly style. He's very aggressive. He wings a lot of shots. And even if they're not hitting, because he's not the most accurate fighter, probably one of the least accurate fighters in UFC history, even if they're not landing, Diego Sanchez can still score points in the judge's eyes. So I can see Diego Sanchez potentially stealing a decision that he doesn't deserve, or I can just see him earning a decision if Jim Miller starts to slow down. I do think Jim Miller wins the first round, but if he does not continue going in the second round at a high pace, then maybe Diego Sanchez can take over and win this one. So I do think that Miller is the more skilled fighter overall, but at the rate that both of these guys are declining, it could just come down to gas tank and aggression, and Diego Sanchez usually has those things in spades. So I think I'm going to pick Diego Sanchez here to pull off the upset. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card, we have a featherweight contest between Darren Elkins, who is 20-5, and Chaz Skelly, who is 15-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
What a crazy, weird fight in a lot of ways, and I'll explain, I guess, here in a second. But I opened Skelly minus 130, the comeback on Elkins minus 110, so virtually a pick 'em with a slight lean towards Skelly. It has been bet up some, and right now it's Skelly minus 155, the comeback on Elkins is plus 135. So more support coming in Skelly's way. I'm not really that surprised by it. He seems to be a little bit, again, more hype on his side, a lot of higher expectations for him as well. Elkins definitely gets respect from, I think, the MMA community, the MMA bettors out there, because he does perform. I mean, we're talking about Diego Sanchez being a warrior. I think you could put Elkins in that category as well. I mean, and he's getting better. I mean, he's improving. He's been spending some time at Alpha Male, of course, and I think that's really done him really good things for him. I mean, I think it's got him a little bit more confident in all areas of his game. His stand-up game is improving a little bit as well, but he's obviously more well-known for his grappling and his wrestling game. So he's going to look to push a pace against Skelly. Skelly, I do think he has some advantage in this fight, so I can understand why some people are coming in this way. I just don't necessarily agree with it as far as the betting window, if there's any value on Skelly, because there's definitely some flaws in his game as well. But I do think Skelly's the more dangerous fighter on the feet. He's got a little bit more power. I think Skelly is a little bit more dangerous on the ground as well. His submission game is pretty smooth. His wrestling's outstanding as well, so he could cause a lot of problems for Elkins. But the problem with Skelly is his conditioning. Now, if you look at MMA Oddsbreaker as well, Frank Trigg's interview, Skelly talks about leaving Team Takedown and kind of going on his own, and he's floating around different gyms. I don't know. That doesn't sit that well with me. It's good to kind of open your eyes and get a different perspective on things, and it could actually benefit him. But at the same time, I think against a fighter like Elkins, it's going to probably harm him. I'm just not sure. From what we've seen Skelly in the past, even though he's got the heart and willpower at times to pull off a win, even if things are getting tough. I mean, evident in his last fight as well. I still think that early on, Skelly will probably be outpointing Elkins, either if it's on the ground or even possibly maybe on the feet a little bit. But in round 2 and round 3, I think Elkins is going to come in and take over. He's just a little bit more durable. He's going to be a little bit more consistent, and I think he's going to basically outgrind Skelly along the way. So tough fight, but I'm going to go against the grain and against the public here, because I do trust Elkins a little bit more. I think if Skelly cannot finish him early, this fight probably hits the scorecards and Elkins probably comes away with a win. So I am going to go with the underdog Elkins, and I think he does probably grind out a decision win over Skelly.
Both of these guys actually are pretty evenly matched. I mean, both are very big featherweights. Both cut a lot of weight to make the 145-pound division. Both guys are grinders for the most part, with excellent wrestling ability. The difference is, usually when you're labeled a grinder, you're more of a guy that has great conditioning and you wear down your opponent. But that's really how you describe Elkins. Skelly is like a grinder, but he tries to get the finish by just wearing down his opponent and then getting a submission or a TKO when his opponent just starts to fade a little bit. And the main difference between these two is the fact that Skelly's conditioning is just not up to par. In his last fight, Skelly was really in some trouble there against Kevin Souza, and then just dug deep and picked up that second round submission. And if he didn't get that, I think Souza would have walked away with a TKO or the decision victory. Like, that was a desperation submission, and he got it. So what Skelly does have going for him is he does have a ton of heart, and he's able to fight through being tired, being exhausted, and pick up wins. But still, that's not a great strategy in terms of the featherweight division, because most guys are going to have a significant cardio edge on him. So what I think is going to happen here is Skelly being a little bit physically stronger, maybe a little bit more powerful with his punches, maybe a little bit more dangerous with his submissions. Skelly's going to come out very aggressive, and he's going to try to get that finish. And if he does not get the finish, then I can see Elkins just making this ugly, pushing Skelly into the fence, looking for takedowns, and then taking over late, as Nick mentioned. So I think overall Skelly is probably the more well-rounded fighter, but the conditioning and pace of Darren Elkins will probably take its toll, and I can see Skelly being gassed by at least the 1.5 round mark. So I see Darren Elkins taking over, winning the last 2 rounds, and winning a decision. So my pick is going to be Darren Elkins. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Vitor Miranda, who is 12-4, taking on Marcelo Guimares, who is 9-1-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Miranda, minus 300. Kumara's plus 220. Right now over at 5 dimes, it is currently Miranda minus 310. Kumara's is plus 255. So line basically staying steady. A little bit more action maybe coming in on Miranda as far as parlays or whatnot go as well. And what you have here is basically your striker versus grappler matchup for sure. I mean, Miranda is a very good striker. I mean, he's got precision. He's got the technique. He's got the smarts. He's got everything to go along with it. He's actually getting better on the ground as well a little bit. I mean, one kryptonite in his game is definitely his takedown defense though. But again, I know he's going to be improving that constantly and he's able a lot of times to get back up off his back. And once he's on the feet, he definitely has an advantage over most. And he's going to have an advantage over Guimaraes here as well. And that's exactly what Guimaraes is going to try to do. He's going to try to get this fight to the floor, try to grind Miranda out. Guimaraes does have a little bit of power on the feet. I mean, he's a strong guy, physically strong guy. So he could do some damage. I mean, if he lands a big bomb or something on the feet, it could definitely be effective. But overall, he's going to look to take this fight to the floor. And if he's not able to do that, Miranda's going to be able to pick him apart and probably knock him out. So grappler versus striker, a lot of times you got to favor the grappler in those matchups. But here, as far as conditioning goes, as far as fight IQ goes, I mean, across the board, I think Miranda is going to be the better fighter. So even if Guimaraes early on, is looking pretty good and making this fight uncomfortable for Miranda, I still think Miranda along the way is going to do enough to probably win 2 out of 3 rounds. And if not, he's going to be able to probably snipe Guimaraes off and knock him out and get the W here as well. So he's a decent favorite for a reason. And I believe Miranda is going to continue his little role here. And he's been looking okay. And I think we're going to see some good things from him in the future as well. He is getting up there in age at 37, but still I think he's not a very old 37 overall in his career. So Miranda has some life left in him, and I think he's going to pick up probably a knockout win over Guimaraes in this spot here.
This is definitely a striker versus grappler matchup between two Brazilians, and Miranda is going to have the size advantage in terms of height and reach, and Guimaraes is kind of that grinder. I mean, he goes out there and he picks up ugly decisions. He is not the most entertaining fighter. He has not been dominant in his victories, and when he does lose, he gets knocked out, like Hyungju Lim. And actually, Guimaraes is a fighter that can make the welterweight division. He decided to move up to middleweight for his last fight, and I think that he's going to be having some trouble putting Vitor Miranda on his back. Miranda is a very dangerous striker, has a lot of power, and while he is getting a little bit up there in years, if Miranda connects with anything on Guimaraes' chin, then Guimaraes is going down. Now, Guimaraes does have some solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu credentials. He is a good, strong grappler. But, I mean, this is a guy that had like a split decision victory over Dan Stitkin. So, I mean, really, Guimaraes is not a very exciting fighter. I don't think the UFC wants him to come in here and play spoiler. I think the UFC likes Miranda, and I expect that this is more of a tune-up fight for Miranda to just keep building his way towards a feature bout in the middleweight division. Now, Guimaraes could, pull off the upset if he's able to repeatedly put Miranda on his back or maybe even lock in a submission, surprisingly, because Miranda was controlled in his UFC debut on the Ultimate Fighter Tough Brazil finale. But again, that was at heavyweight. And so I think that Miranda should be in good shape here, and as long as he can avoid being put on his back, then he not just wins, but should win by TKO. So my pick is going to be Vitor Miranda. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Eric Silva, who is 18-6 with 1 no contest, taking on Nordine Talib, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Silva minus 280, the comeback on Talib plus 200. And right now looking over at the line, it's minus 230 for Silva. Talib is plus 190. So 10-cent drop on the dog. Line margins have tightened up a little bit as well. Nothing crazy here. And it is a tough fight because, I mean, as far as skill set goes, there's no doubt that Silva has a big advantage. I mean, it's unfortunate that he hasn't lived up to all the hype and expectations that we all had for him because a lot of people thought that he was the next dominant welterweight champion because of his skill set, period. I mean, the guy can knock you out. He's so dangerous on the feet. And then on the ground, of course, his wrestling's decent and he's got a great jiu-jitsu game. So Silva is a very dangerous fighter in all aspects of the game. The problem with Silva is his cardio, his conditioning. Obviously, defensively, he's a little bit flawed on the feet as well. So those have come through a little bit too much, more than we all expected as far as flaws go in his career. Now, Talib, has been one of these guys that I think has kind of been overperforming at times. He's a little bit more consistent. You know that he's definitely has some pretty good cardio. He trains at a good camp in TriStar, so they get him prepared well. He's got some decent wrestling. He's got some decent power on the feet too. It's just, I mean, as far as submission goes, I mean, there's a big difference in Silva's game compared to Talib's. So he does have a weakness in that area as far as, possibly getting caught or the smoothness of a ground game there. But this is tough because it basically comes down to, in my opinion, Talib has a shot on the feet because he's got a little bit of power, and Silva does have some bad defense. But is he going to knock Silva out? I doubt he does. I think it's going to come down to, can Silva hang on and win at least 2 out of 3 rounds, because he does have a tendency to fade. I know he's been working at King's MMA. I expect some better things from Silva in this fight. Hopefully his conditioning is a little bit better as well. But the interesting factor is, I mean, if this fight longer goes, it should favor Talib a little bit. So Silva has to pretty much win this early. If not, basically hang on, I think, to win at least 2 out of 3 rounds to win on the scorecards as well. If not, it could be upset city here. So a tough one to pick because of Silva's weakness in making it 3 rounds strong. Or possibly, like I said, getting clipped along the way, but I still have to pick him because I think he is a better fighter. And I think along the way, Talib is very hittable. Silva has a lot of power, so I could see him finish Talib on the feet. Or if this fight does get to the ground, I mean, Silva has a big advantage on the ground as far as submission skill goes as well. So I do pick Silva to win this fight. I do think he does win this fight more times than not, and he should. He's a better fighter. But as far as the betting window goes, again, this is a fight that you got to take a little bit of caution because Silva still has those weaknesses that I pointed out. So it can't be a confident play or bet either way here, but I am going to pick Silva to win because he is the better fighter. So I hope he does come through and kind of gets back on track and continues to make a run towards something, at least in 170, maybe a title shot down the road if he does get better and continue to improve. We'll see. But Silva's my pick.
This is actually similar to the Darren Elkins versus Chaz Skelly fight, except Eric Silva is a better finisher than Skelly, and Talib is not quite as much of a grinder as Elkins. But for the most part, it's a similar strategy where Eric Silva is going to want to try to come in there and put away Talib in the first round or two, and then if he starts to gas, then Talib could take over. Talib has respectable striking, respectable wrestling. He's been able to grind out wins, pick up decisions for the most part. Granted, in his last fight against Warley Alves, he finally got exposed a little bit for not being much of a threat in any area, and then Alves just went after him and was able to hurt him on the feet and then submit him on the ground. So I think that's the game plan here for Eric Silva. Silva has a lot of power on the feet. We've seen that time and time again. He's kind of a can crusher. He goes out and he smashes the people he's supposed to smash, and then when he faces a step up in competition, he loses. I mean, you see it repeatedly. He loses against guys, most recently Neil Magny, but over and over, the Matt Browns, the John Fitches, just every time he's stepped up against somebody that's a top 15 level fighter, he loses. So I don't think Nordine Talib is a top 15 level fighter. I think Eric Silva, even though he's a bit of a gatekeeper right now, he should be able to keep Nordine Talib from passing that gate. Silva just packs a lot of power, and I don't think Talib can survive if he gets cracked. And Silva is still a dangerous submission threat as well. So if Talib shoots in for a takedown, I think he could get guillotine choked. Silva could sweep him. Silva could pick up a submission as well. So really, the only way I see Talib winning this fight is if Silva completely gasses in the first round and then Talib wins the next 2. So I think that's unlikely. So I'm going to pick Eric Silva to pick up the win, either by a decision where he loses the last round or a stoppage somewhere early in the first 2 rounds. Now moving on to the main event of the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have a welterweight contest between Brandon Thatch, who is 11-3, and Sayar Bahadurzada, who is 21-6-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Thatch, minus 300. The comeback on Bahadurzada, plus 220. Right now, looking over 5 times, it is minus 310 for Thatch, and the comeback is plus 255 for Bahadurzada. So I'm going to say Sayar to keep it a little bit easier for me here from this point on for Bahadurzada. Thatch, definitely an interesting fight here because, I mean, unfortunately, we had a lot of high expectations again for Thatch. I mean, the guy's definitely a beast on the feet. He's a very physically strong fighter. He's a very dangerous striker. He's got a ton of knockout power. I mean, his clinch game is outstanding. A lot of good things to like about that. It's just unfortunate for him. Again, his conditioning. This is only a 3-round fight, so it shouldn't have a huge impact, but his conditioning and his chin are two flawed areas. Now, for Sire, he's been out since December of 2013, believe it or not, when he lost to John Howard by decision. So he's had some time off a little bit. In a way, it's good because I think he can definitely work on some areas that he needs improvement on. But in a way, it's bad as well because you don't know what you're going to see when he comes back. But Sire has been training at Jackson's camp. I think that's going to probably be a great thing for him, especially in this matchup versus Thatch. Now, Sire is known for his striking skill. He's got a tremendous amount of knockout power. He's a well-rounded fighter for sure, but that's where it's at for him. I mean, he gets people, if he's able to keep the fight upright, he's a dangerous fighter and he's able to clip and knock out most people. Even though Thatch is going to be the bigger fighter here, he's actually going to have Sire's going to have 2 inches of pure reach over Thatch, which is interesting as well. And Thatch, coming off of that loss that he got just really floored to Gunnar Nelson, it's interesting because a lot of people weren't expecting that. Now he's facing a real hard hitter in Sire here in this spot. So that's where it's kind of a head scratcher as far as matchup goes. I think I am going to lean a little bit more towards Thatch because, again, he is a beast on the feet. I understand his aggressiveness is a fun thing to watch, but I think he actually has a little bit of an advantage here in his wrestling as well. A lot of people might not expect that, but I think Thatch, his game plan here should honestly be to try to look for some takedowns and kind of slow the tempo of this fight down and kind of grind Sire out. I think that's probably his safest way to go here because, I mean, Sire on the feet, again, has devastating knockout power, and I don't trust Thatch's chin enough. So this is definitely a dog or pass situation because if Sire is able to keep it upright, even though Thatch is dangerous on the feet, I think Sire's chin is a little bit better, and I trust it a little bit more. So I think he could be the more dangerous, effective striker on the feet. So Thatch is going to have to really use a complete MMA game here to win this fight. I think he probably will, but again, the confidence level is not really that high, especially on a 3-1 favorite type of thing. That's why I think it's a dog or pass situation. So I think this is a good spot for Sire to come back because he's got an opponent that he knows he could probably knock out if he catches him and if he stays upright. And I think there's a possibility he does that. But still, I mean, overall, with the matchup, with the tools, with the skill set, you got to favor Thatch slightly. I'm just not sure if you should favor him as far as 3-1 goes. So my pick is going to be Thatch to win this fight. But again, it's honestly not a very confident spot. I could see him getting knocked out as well.
Sayar Bahadurzada has been out for so long, and he lost a lot of momentum in his last 2 UFC fights. But again, if you look at him and you go back and watch him, he was getting out-grappled in those 2 fights by Kim and Howard. And Brandon Thatch probably isn't going to be looking to out-grapple him. Thatch has always been just a banger on the feet, a guy with a lot of power, uses that size and height and reach typically to go in there and crack his opponents with big punches, big kicks, big elbows and knees once he gets inside. He has a really strong, aggressive, explosive Muay Thai game. But Bahadurzada packs a ton of power on the feet. I mean, this guy, before those 2 decision losses where he got out-grappled, I think he knocked out about 4 or 5 people in a row, including another one if you go back a couple fights before that. So, I mean, this guy can hit. He can hit hard. And as you saw in Thatch's last fight against Gunnar Nelson, maybe his chin isn't as good as we thought it was. I mean, he got dropped by Gunnar Nelson, and that's not a fighter that has been typically known to possess a lot of power on the feet. So Thatch is going to be playing with fire here because Bahadurzada typically does not lose fights where he's in a stand-up type of exchanges. Thatch is going to be the quicker guy. I think Thatch is going to have the higher volume of the 2 by a landslide, but Bahadurzada should pack more one-punch power. So Thatch, I expect to be setting the tone, pushing the pace, and winning over the judges if he doesn't knock Bahadurzada out. And in the meantime, Bahadurzada is going to be looking for that home run swing. And if he connects with it, he could definitely win this fight. Do not underestimate Bahadurzada here, even though he's been out for so long. I mean, he's training at Greg Jackson's gym. He's probably going to be more than prepared for this fight. But again, I do think that Brandon Thatch pulls this off. But don't underestimate Bahadurzada. I think this line is not in a very good spot right now for anybody that's backing Brandon Thatch. So my pick is Brandon Thatch, but I am exercising caution here. Now kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have a women's bantamweight contest between Amanda Nunes, who is 11-4, and Valentina Shevchenko, who is 12-1. Now, Nick, What's the MMA odds makers' perspective on this one?
I opened Shevchenko minus 140 to come back on Nunes, even money right now. The line has flipped. It's Nunes minus 155. The comeback on Shevchenko is plus 135. So more support coming in Nunes' way. I'm not surprised. And in fact, I mean, I was expecting maybe some action to come in that way as well. I mean, Nunes' last performance over McMahon, man, that was pretty sweet, because I'll tell you what, McMahon, you say what you want about her. Maybe she's, hit that decline spot in her career, but she's definitely an outstanding fighter, a fighter that could, honestly, that most of us thought would probably be one of the toughest fights for Rousey or any title contender now, of course, with Holm as well, because of her skill set. But she hasn't really performed up to par, and Nunes is still, it was a solid win picking her off like she did. I mean, Nunes has a ton of power on the feet. She's very capable of knocking people out on the ground. Obviously, if she gets top position, she's very devastating. I mean, she's got a lot of power to go with her ground and pound as well. So she's a finisher. I mean, she's capable of ending the fight at any moment. That's how dangerous Nunes is. I think she's going to run into a very hard matchup here of Shevchenko. I think Shevchenko has proven, I mean, coming in short notice and taking a fight against a person like Kaufman and beating her like she did. I mean, it was a decisive win. I was impressed with her. She's a striker. She's got a Muay Thai background, and she's very skilled on the feet. She has a southpaw, so she's got that going for her as well. She's an accurate striker, so she does a lot of good things on the feet. But the thing with Shevchenko is that's really impressive to me is she's actually been working on her wrestling, working on her ground game as well. So for being a striker, she has very good wrestling. She's capable of taking the fight to the floor, and she's capable of submitting people as well. Her submission defense, at least at this point, seems like it's okay as well. So a lot of good things to like about Shevchenko going into this fight. And one thing that I like the most is her conditioning and her cardio. I know in the past it might have been an issue with her, but I mean, as of late, if you look back at some of her performances in fights, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I mean, she was able to get the job done against Kaufman on short notice. This time around, I think her conditioning is going to be even better. Nunes, on the other hand, you cannot say that about her. I think that she does. That's her main weakness, is she does tend to slow down in fights. And if she gets put on her back, she can definitely get handled on the ground as well. I mean, she's dangerous with her submission game somewhat, but I don't think she's going to be much of a threat if she's on her back against Shevchenko in this fight either. And then on the feet, obviously, I actually lean a little bit more to Shevchenko. I know that Nunes is a dangerous, and again, with the power she has, she can do damage to most, but I still think Shevchenko is the better, more technical fighter across the board. She's got the better cardio, conditioning. She's got more ways to win this fight, and I think she does take over. If she survives basically early on, I wouldn't be surprised if Nunes wins round 1, but I would be surprised if Nunes wins round 2 and round 3, if she's even around that long. So I think Shevchenko wins this fight either by late stoppage or she wins on the scorecard. So I'm going to pick her to win and pull off the slight upset.
Valentina Shevchenko is a terrific prospect. I mean, she went in there on short notice against Sarah Kaufman, a former bantamweight champion of the world, and won the first 2 rounds pretty convincingly to win the decision. Now, with more of a full training camp here, I think she's going to be very dangerous here against Amanda Nunes. Now, Nunes is a little bit more well-rounded, explosive. She's more of a dynamic athlete than Kaufman, so I expect Nunes will be looking to land big power shots on the feet and potentially looking to take this fight to the floor, where even though she's not great on the ground, she does have decent wrestling and a bit of a submission threat, maybe even some ground and pound that she can threaten with. Shevchenko will have to be on her guard there. So Nunes will be the bigger fighter in this contest, but I expect Shevchenko to be by far the more technical striker. Shevchenko lands big kicks. Shevchenko has a good composed technical punching. So I expect Nunes might get a little flustered here. Maybe she'll overreach a little bit, trying to land big shots on the feet, and Shevchenko can counter her really well. But the one thing I am concerned about with Shevchenko is if Nunes is able to put her on her back and keep her there. You saw that in the 3rd round when Shevchenko got taken down by Kaufman. Shevchenko didn't have a great answer for it. So if Nunes is able to get this fight to the floor and stay on top, then she could either win a decision or potentially get a stoppage victory. I mean, you saw she had Katzengano in a world of hurt, actually, in her fight, and almost finished it from top position. But as this fight goes on, I think the difference here is, while Shevchenko lost the 3rd round against Sarah Kaufman, I think Shevchenko would win a 3rd round against Nunes, because Nunes does not have a great gas tank. She slows down in fights, and she's really more of that early explosion type of fighter. And if Nunis does not land that big shot early or does not potentially get a stoppage in the first round or two, I think Shevchenko takes over in the third round. And Shevchenko could just take over for all 3 rounds because she is so much more technical on the feet. So I think I agree with Nick. I think that Valentina Shevchenko is a live dog here, and I'm going to pick her. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Corey Anderson, who is 8-1, taking on Tom Lawler, who is 9-5 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Anderson minus 230 to come back on Lawler plus 170. Right now, it's actually Anderson minus 310 to come back on Lawler is plus 255. Across the down bet screen, there is some places that have it under 3-1, 275s out there. So it basically varies, but it's basically a ballpark 3-1 in most spots. I think the line might be getting a little bit too high. Lawler is a better fighter than most people honestly give him credit for, and he's been that way for a long time now. It's just, unfortunately for him, he's had some performances or he's had some losses that don't really fit well with him. But overall, he's a pretty good fighter. I mean, the guy has some power on the feet. Obviously, I mean, you could check out his last fight. He was able to floor Villante and pick up the W there. And then, of course, he's got that wrestling background that he could take the fight to the floor against most people and can grind them out. And then one dangerous aspect of Lawler's submission game is that guillotine choke. It's nasty. If he gets around your neck, it locks up his hands, it's over. I mean, you're not going to probably get out of Lawler's guillotine choke. So he's a very dangerous and capable fighter. Anderson, on the other hand, I think he is the better fighter because I think Anderson has a little bit more potential, a little bit bigger upside. Obviously, he's going to be the bigger fighter here against Lawler as well. He has a wrestling background. He's got some pretty nice boxing. And I think people kind of written him off a little bit after he did lose to Villante. After he got knocked out, I think people were saying, oh, he's not as good as we thought he was or whatever. His conditioning at times, he does tend to slow down, but he's bounced back with 2 really solid wins, good performances. And I think this is another opportunity for him to pick up another solid win over a very good fighter. So as far as line goes, I mean, like I said, I think it's getting a tad high because Anderson does have, somewhat of a suspect chin. He's hittable. And Lawler has enough power that he could land and kind of replicate what he did against Villante in that fight. Or on the other hand, Anderson sticks his neck in and against Lawler's guillotine choke, he could get put out that way. But I think overall Anderson's going to be able to control the pace of the fight. I think he is the better, more technical boxer on the feet. He's going to be, again, he should be able to control on the ground a little bit more as well. So it's Anderson's fight to win or lose. I do expect him to win this fight, so I'm going to pick him. But it's another spot at the betting window that you got to be a little bit more cautious because I think that people underestimate Lawler a little bit too much, and this could be another spot where he proves everybody wrong. So careful off there, but the pick should be Anderson, and I think he does get the nod.
This fight is really coming down to the puncher's chance that Tom Lawler has. You saw it in his last fight against Gian Villante where Lawler lost the first round and then quickly picked up a knockout in the second round after landing 1 big shot. So if Corey Anderson gets too reckless or leaves a big opening or just gets caught, then Tom Lawler can win this fight. If Anderson shoots in too wildly, leaves his neck exposed, Tom Lawler has a really good guillotine choke. Tom Lawler could potentially win this fight. You saw that in his bout against CB Dalloway early in his career. So Tom Lawler still is dangerous, but again, I think that this is definitely Corey Anderson's fight to lose. Anderson is the quicker fighter. He is significantly bigger. He's got 5 inches in reach, 3 inches taller. Anderson, while he doesn't have as much pure power, Anderson is an extremely good wrestler. So if he can get Lawler on his back, I think he can just grind him out and beat him up like he did Jan Blachowicz. Although Lawler is a decent wrestler in his own right, so it won't be easy. And the other thing Anderson has going for him is Lawler hasn't fought in a while. He actually took some time away from fighting because he was suffering from some after effects of concussions and training. So that's something Lawler's getting a bit up there in years. So maybe that could have some effect on this fight. So I really think Corey Anderson is coming into his own a little bit. He did suffer that first loss to Gian Villante because he got caught with a big punch late. But I do think Corey Anderson is the better fighter here, the more well-rounded fighter here. And as long as he doesn't get clipped or caught in a submission, then he should win this fight. Anderson even is getting a little bit better on the feet. So he should be able to hold his own there as long as he doesn't, eat a huge shot. So I like Corey Anderson. I think he picks up the win, probably by decision because Tom Lawler's pretty tough. So I expect, Anderson just getting some takedowns and grinding this one out. Now, sticking with the light heavyweight division, we have the aforementioned Gian Villante, who is 14-6, taking on Ilir Latifi, who is 12-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Latifi minus 150 to come back on Villante plus 110. Everybody out there was happy that Latifi opened so low, and they hopped on him right away. Right now it's minus 210 for Latifi to come back on Villante plus 175. So a lot of confidence out there for Latifi in this matchup. In a way, I understand because Villante has some flaws in his defense. I mean, offensively, Villante's definitely put together well. I think he's a dangerous striker on the feet. He's going to have some advantages over his fight. I mean, he's going to have a little bit of reach. He's going to be just a bigger more physical fighter than Latifi here, but Latifi is obviously a powerhouse. So, I mean, as far as pure strength goes, I don't think we can say that fairly, but still overall, he's going to have some physical attributes over Latifi here in this spot. And then again, I think he's more than capable of being dangerous and doing some damage on the feet against most people. And he's got the wrestling and takedown defense in most cases that it's hard to give Villante to the ground. I mean, he's able to keep the fight upright, and he's actually, in most cases, has the ability to get the fight and stay in top position on the ground as well. Now, conditioning has always been a problem for Villante. It seems he's addressed that a little bit. I mean, he's able to go 3 rounds. I mean, even that Anderson fight, I mean, he was able to get that W late there, which was impressive. That was one of his biggest wins lately as well. But the problem is, I think people are disrespecting Villante because, man, he's very hittable on the feet. I mean, he showed that even fights where he wasn't knocked out or rocked or whatever, he's still taking some punishment on the feet. I think he's a pretty tough guy, but again, coming in off that crazy performance against Lawler, where Lawler was able to just floor him. I think a lot of people, that's fresh in people's minds. And I think Latifi has that kind of power, obviously. I mean, he's got the speed, he's got the power. I think he's a little bit more steady and a little bit more trustable. That's why people are coming in that way as well. Latifi obviously has a better submission game on the ground. I don't think it's going to work here against Villante because I don't think he's going to be able to get the fight to the floor. So I do think this fight's probably going to play out on the feet. Latifi, he's been getting better. He's got more confidence, obviously, as well, because he's been training at All-Stars, and then he actually spending some time in Florida as well. So Latifi's getting better, improving his confidence. Every aspect of his game is getting better, but I still think that Villante, it's a tough matchup for him because Latifi's not going to be able to bully him around, and Villante is going to be a little bit longer. He's going to be landing his own strikes. So really what it comes down to me is if Latifi doesn't knock Villante out, he probably loses a fight. It'll be a close decision. Villante will probably, I think, pull off the upset on the scorecards, or maybe we get a late finish here as well, or Villante lands along the way. I know Latifi definitely has some issues in his own right. I mean, that body shot that he took against Blachowicz, it doesn't sit that well for me. I mean, I could see Villante going to work on the body a little bit. He does have a pretty good kicking game. And again, with his reach on the feet, it could get interesting. So I'm not as confident out there as everybody else just thinking that Latifi automatically won this fight. I actually think that Villante can win this fight, and it's a good spot for him to bounce back and get some of that respect back. So I am going to go against the grain, and I'm going to pick Villante to pull off the upset win over Latifi.
This fight is very interesting because neither guy has really picked up quality win in the UFC yet. Both guys, most of their wins are over fighters that are not in the UFC or bottom of the barrel light heavyweights, or even guys that didn't even stay in the light heavyweight division. Latifi especially has been, more of a can crusher. I mean, his best win in the UFC was probably his last fight over Sean O'Connell. And, O'Connell's not exactly been a world beater at 205. Now, Villante would hands down be Latifi's best win if he's able to pick this up. And Latifi would probably be Villante's best win. And both of these guys have a lot of power on the feet. Both guys have good overall grappling games. Villante's is more wrestling focused. Latifi's is definitely more in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu submission department. So one of the big differences between them is size. Villante's got 5 inches in height, 3 inches in reach, while Latifi has the better chin, in my opinion. I think Latifi can take it. I mean, he went the distance against Gegard Mousasi on short notice in his UFC debut, and Villante has been knocked out several times in his UFC career. The only time that Latifi's ever been hurt in a fight was when he ate a huge body kick right to the liver from Jan Blachowicz. So I think Latifi, as long as he doesn't eat a huge kick from Villante to the body, which could happen, Villante's kicks are pretty underrated, But as long as he can avoid that, then Latifi should be in a decent position to trade blow for blow with headshots. And if Latifi connects, then I think Villante's going down in a heap. Villante's chin just is not that good. And Latifi is a little bit more of the explosive power athlete. I mean, this guy is freakishly strong. So if he can either get a hold of Villante and get this fight to the floor, or if Latifi can connect with that big bomb, then I see Latifi picking up a finish. Villante, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for him. I expect, even though he does have some of the physical advantages in terms of size, Villante's probably going to have to grind this out a little bit and wear on Latifi. Maybe get this fight to the clinch, maybe try to get top position, or just work over with kicks and jabs from distance. And I think that's going to be a bit more difficult of a game plan to pursue for him. And I expect Ilir Latifi to put Villante out in the first round or two. Although Villante will be dangerous, and even though Villante slows down in fights, he has picked up late finishes before. So maybe if Latifi can't put Villante away, then Villante could land something late. But for the most part, I expect Ilir Latifi to pick this one up. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a women's bantamweight title fight between champion Holly Holm, who is 10-0, and challenger and former Strikeforce women's bantamweight champ Miesha Tate, who is 17-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Holm minus 400, the comeback on Tate plus 310, and right now it is minus 345 for Holm. The comeback on Tate is plus 285. So a little bit more action. It has been coming in on Tate now. The sportsbooks at this point, the line has been out for a long time. They're pretty even on this fight. And it's not going to be a huge decision, I think, as far as the books go, because both these girls are going to get respect. I mean, styles make fights. And this is definitely an intriguing matchup. Now, you would think that if Holm was able to, for the most part, be able to keep the fight upright against Rousey, she'd be able to do the same against Tate, even though Tate's more of a wrestler. And of course, Rousey has more of the judo background, but still, I believe that's probably true. I think that Holm's takedown defense is good enough to basically stifle Tate's ground game and her aggressiveness by getting the fight to the floor. I think on the feet, obviously, it's going to come down to the striking ability. And I think that Holm obviously has a huge edge over Tate. I know that Tate has a little bit of power. Her win over Jessica Eye was impressive. She was getting beat on the feet though in that fight. Jessica Eye was kind of having her way with her early on until that big bomb landed, and it kind of changed the complexion of the fight. So Tate has been working on her striking game. It is getting better. She does have power on the feet. She's confident that way. And I think, if she clips anybody accurate in the women's bantamweight division, Tate could definitely do some damage and possibly pull off an upset win. So she's got a puncher's chance against Holm. And then of course on the ground, Tate definitely has the advantages. I mean, she's always been a tremendous grappler. She has that wrestling background. And once she gets on top, I mean, you can ask Sarah McMahon, Tate's hard to buck off and get her just to get back up and to your feet and kind of utilize what you have. And as far as Holm's game goes, is her striking. So if Holm does end up on her back, it's going to be hard for her to buck again Tate off and get back to her feet and start doing what she wants to do. But regardless, I think this comes down to Holm being able to keep this fight upright. I think she will do that. I think Holm will outpoint Tate along the way pretty easy. And I think there's even a possible shot that Holm will land maybe a knockout blow along the way as well. Holm's not really known for her huge knockout power, but obviously against Rousey that changed a little bit. I mean, she does have some effective striking. Her kicking game can come into play here as well. She's just got to be careful the way she goes about it, but Holm is just a far superior striker. I don't think that Tate's going to be able to get this fight to the ground, so Holm's going to win. It comes down to that. I mean, as the fight goes, both these girls are usually conditioned pretty well, but I trust Holm a little bit better in that area as well. So my pick is going to be Holm. I mean, she's minus 345 right now. It's a tough spot to kind of bet, but at the same time, I do think that she wins the fight, and I think that more times than not, she's going to end up facing Rousey again for the rematch here down the road.
Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, it's a great stylistic matchup. It's actually very similar to the Rousey Tate matchup, except Tate is not as good of an athlete as Rousey was. Holm wants to keep this fight upright. Holm wants to pick Tate apart with counters. She wants to circle away. She wants to keep her distance. And Tate is going to want to try to throw big bombs and then get inside and try to get Holm on her back with her wrestling. I really don't see Tate having any other means to victory here. She has showcased some power, especially her last fight against Jessica Eye, where she hurt Jessica Eye multiple times standing. But But even in that fight, if you go back and watch it, I mean, Jessica Eye was piecing up Miesha Tate on the feet for the most part of the first round and even some parts of the second round. And she just got caught with a big shot. And if Jessica Eye is able to, just really work over Miesha Tate on the feet and have her in some trouble at a couple spots, then I think Holly Holm is going to have a field day on the feet against Miesha Tate. Miesha Tate is going to have to be extremely careful here. She cannot afford to eat big shots like Ronda Rousey did in Holmes' last fight. So Miesha's going to have to be more careful with entering the clinch and with her entrances to get inside, because otherwise Holm is just going to just crack her with that left hand or with the jab, and then just knock her out eventually. Miesha Tate's chin is not very good. I mean, Ronda's showcased a good chin so far throughout her MMA career, and Holly Holm put her out in less than a round and a half. And if Miesha Tate is just as aggressive, I think Holly Holm could put her out in the first round. And Holly Holm does have 5-round fight experience outside the UFC. I don't think conditioning will be an issue whatsoever. So I don't think Miesha Tate can just have a game plan of just survive and take over late even, because Holly Holm's conditioning should be great. She's picked up 5th-round stoppage victories before with head kicks. Holm's kicking game is going to be very dangerous, although she has to be cautious. Make sure to snap the leg back afterwards, because if Tate can grab a leg and get her down, then maybe Tate can get something going. But again, for the most part, Holly Holm's striking is so good and so technical and so dangerous that if Miesha Tate is eating a lot of shots, especially early, then I don't see how she's able to come back in this fight. So unless Miesha Tate picks up a lot of takedowns or lands a miracle haymaker, then this is absolutely Holly Holm's fight to lose, and she should probably pick up a TKO victory at some point. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a welterweight matchup between UFC featherweight champion Conor McGregor, who is 19-2, and late short notice replacement, normally lightweight contender Nate Diaz, who is 19-10. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened McGregor minus 280, the comeback on Diaz plus 220. Right now, not a surprise for those of you guys that are following the betting lines and our podcast for a while here. It's McGregor minus 485, the comeback on Nate Diaz is plus 385. So an enormous amount of support coming in McGregor's way. I kind of underestimated that much support on McGregor, especially since the fight is at welterweight. I was going to open the line slightly over 3-1, but still got blown out of proportion. I mean, when the fight was announced at welterweight, I was a little surprised that I was hearing 160, 165-ish, and I thought that that's where the fight would play out, considering Diaz is stepping in a short notice, but I was wrong. It's at welterweight. McGregor has, I mean, it doesn't matter. He's got that much confidence that it doesn't matter who he fights, where he fights, whatever. I mean, you got to love that in his head. I mean, the mental game of McGregor is something special for sure. But I still think that people are just counting Diaz out a little bit. I think that Diaz is still a capable fighter. I mean, if you look at his fight, a lot of people counted him out recently against Michael Johnson as well, and that was a beautiful performance. I mean, Diaz has those type of performances from time to time for sure. And I think he's capable of possibly doing it again. Now, of course, Diaz is hittable. I understand that. A lot of people think he's going to be slow. He's going to be sitting right in front of McGregor, and McGregor has that special talent on the feet. He's got a tremendous amount of accuracy. He is a southpaw as well. So he can definitely do damage. He's got precision striker, and he's a precision striker, and he's got that kind of power that can put anybody out. He's proven that time and time again. He's got the confidence. He's backed up everything he said thus far. So in the mental games that he plays with people, I think it even has a little bit of effect on Diaz. So I can understand it. I just think the line is getting blown out of proportion right now. We've done that in the past with a lot of great fighters. We've done that with Ronda Rousey, thinking that she's basically invincible. Look what happened. We did that against, actually TJ Dillashaw against Brow in that fight. And look what happened. So it is possible. I know a lot of people think there's sure things and there's no way this can happen, no way that can happen. Man, I tell you what, Diaz shows up here and his chin holds up. It's going to be interesting in this fight because that length is hard to deal with. I mean, the way Diaz goes about it, I understand that he's kind of a sit and duck at times, but he's capable of using that reach. He's capable of being the aggressor. He's capable of pushing the pace of a fight, and he does a lot of damage. Now, of course, Diaz, he gets what he wants, this fight's going to the ground. He's not even going to have to play the game against Conor McGregor. But of course, Diaz doesn't have the kind of wrestling that's so dominant that he's going to get the fight to the floor. McGregor has pretty decent takedown defense. He's been working his wrestling a lot. He's been working his grappling a lot. So he is improving all the time. So it's not going to be easy for Diaz to get that. But even in a scramble, even up against the cage, you don't ever know what happens in the fight. I mean, he could catch something. He could end up taking McGregor's back in. If once it is on the ground, Diaz has a huge advantage over McGregor. So there's a possibility he pulls off a sub. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here because I am going to pick McGregor to win. I mean, more times than not, he should win this fight again. He does have the power. I understand what everybody sees, but I just don't trust it as much as everybody else. I mean, confidence is one thing, but he is moving up 2 weight divisions. Anybody can say what they want. Diaz has fought at 170 before. I realize he normally fights at 155, but in most cases, I mean, if you look at Diaz's resume, he's lost against grapplers. With the exception of the Josh Thompson fight, I mean, that's who beats Diaz, is people that can lay and prey on him, that can avoid getting submitted off his back once you put him there. So that's not the type of fighter McGregor is. Now, McGregor probably has, again, underrated wrestling. He could be able to get some takedowns here and there if he wanted. I don't think that's going to be his game plan, obviously. So that's not going to be the case. So Diaz, minus the Josh Thompson fight, he doesn't lose to strikers. I mean, he performed really well against Cerrone. A lot of people were counting him out in that fight as well. I know that's dating back a little bit of time now as well. So Diaz is the type of fighter that on the feet, he overperforms and people underestimate him all the time. I do think he has a realistic shot at pulling off the upset win over McGregor here. I'm not going to pick it again. I understand that. I do think McGregor probably wins this fight, but I'm just not as confident as everybody else. And I'm hoping obviously for the sports books in the entire world that, you know, the betting action, I hope Diaz pulls off the solid upset here. So I'm going to be rooting for him. I'm going to be pulling for him, but I do think McGregor wins and it's hard to pick against him at this point, even if it is at 170. So my pick is going to be McGregor to probably knock Diaz out, but I hope I'm wrong.
The biggest advantages Conor McGregor typically has in fights is the fact that he's the lefty, he's the southpaw, and he's facing a righty, and he's the bigger, stronger guy, and he's able to get in his opponent's head. And I think all 3 of those advantages are taken away here because Nate Diaz is a lefty. Nate Diaz actually has the longer reach. This fight's at welterweight, so it's completely nullifying a lot of the size and reach advantages that McGregor typically has. And Nate Diaz does not give a shit when he fights. This guy has no issues in terms of the mental side of things. He's usually the one that's trying to play mind games. So that could make for some fun going on in the cage. But for the most part, even with those advantages taken away, McGregor's actually helping to take away some of Diaz's advantages because Diaz usually fights at a high pace. He usually fights for having no issue going the full 3 rounds hard. And with this being a shorter training camp, only 2 weeks notice, Diaz might not be able to come in as good shape as he typically does. So that could take away something that Nate Diaz really likes to do. And I don't see McGregor being thrown off by Diaz taunting and doing all kinds of crazy stuff inside the octagon either. So a lot of the strengths that both of these guys have are nullified in this fight. But that being said, one thing that I think really stands out to me is the fact that Nate Diaz has terrible defense against kicks. And while Conor McGregor's punching has always kind of been the focus, that's where he's picked up his wins, he does have an improving kicking game. You saw that in the Chad Mendes fight where he landed some nasty body kicks and slowed Mendes down and then eventually took over. And I think in this fight, I think kicks are going to play a big part. Nate Diaz has typically done terrible defending against kicks throughout his career. He just ignores them. They did serious damage against him in the Ben Henderson title fight and in the Josh Thompson fight where he actually got dropped and hurt and finished after eating a huge head kick. So I think Conor McGregor, if he really attacks Nate Diaz's legs and body and even head with kicks, that's going to be a huge advantage for him because Diaz just does not defend them well whatsoever. They will accumulate. Nate Diaz does not have a great chin. He has good recovery, but he gets hurt and rocked in fights all the time. And if Conor McGregor connects with something huge, I see Nate Diaz going down. If they're landing the same blow at the same time, then it's Nate Diaz that's going down because Conor McGregor's chin is granite. I mean, this guy has eaten some big shots from a lot of fighters, especially, Chad Mendes, a huge power puncher, and didn't even really faze him. He just kind of laughed it off. So I think if he can just rely on the chin on the feet, then he can just trade blow for blow with Diaz and really put a hurt on him. Now, in terms of athleticism and speed, McGregor is definitely the better athlete. He's definitely the quicker guy going in there against Diaz. I think he'll be able to get in and land big shots and not slow down like Michael Johnson did, because Johnson was landing some good shots early, and then just Diaz took over. And then the only real area where Diaz should have an advantage is if this fight gets up close and personal. Maybe Diaz has a pretty good judo game, underrated. He's thrown some opponents around a little bit if he can get his hands on them. So even though he doesn't have great wrestling, maybe he could drag or toss Conor to the floor. And if he gets it to the floor, that's where Diaz's strength lies. I mean, he has a very, very good submission game, an excellent Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So if he's able to wrap Conor McGregor up with something, then potentially he could pull off a huge upset. But for the most part, I expect this fight to take place on the feet. I think Diaz is, has too much pride to really go for takedowns. I think he wants to just stand and bang with Conor and see what happens. And I think that's going to be to his detriment. So I expect Conor McGregor to probably pick up a TKO win at some point, probably around the second round after he really finds his range. So my pick is going to be Conor McGregor. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 196. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast, featuring our premium bets, will be out this Friday following the weigh-in. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.